Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing a review and please bear with me, it's a long title, The Prince Rupert Hotel for the Homeless, a true story of love and compassion amid a pandemic by Christina Lamb, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5. My Booktuber Shoutout today goes to Alex Black Reads. I came across your channel quite recently, and there's usual content and stuff like with hauls, TBRs, wrap ups. But I really like her channel because she has some fun videos about reading her lowest rated books on her to be read and her highest rated books on her to be read, and also like titles like why I'm quitting these authors and why I'll never read their books again. So it's a fun channel, and I'll link it down below if you want to check her out. And as always, before I go into my full book review, I'll always appreciate it if you can please hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have read this book or any like COVID related books, I just felt like this book was such a time capsule of 2020. Please comment down below because I'd love to hear your recommendations. The year this book was published is probably no surprise. It's quite recent in 2022, and the genre is nonfiction, and I would actually go a bit deeper and call it a bit of slice of life, a bit of profile, a bit of journalism, which will make sense once I talk about the author. And obviously, it's a time capsule of 2019 pandemic, where it first kind of started happening around the world. About the author, Christina Lamb. So she is British and she went to the University of Oxford, and she had a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics. And she is one of Britain's leading foreign correspondents. And she usually writes for the Sunday Times as well. If you look at what she has covered, it's actually quite impressive. She has covered wars from Iraq to Libya to Angola to Syria, and she also covers a lot of like women oppression around the world, and especially young girls who are abducted or used for sex slaves. And she also has a big focus on the Afghan women's plight. One thing, and I'll pop the book here, is I didn't know her by name, but I'm very familiar with this cover, is she also helped co-write I Am Malala, the story of a girl who stood for education and was shot by the Taliban. So you probably have seen this book too. It's from 2013. So Christina Lamb is very prolific, I guess, like profile journalist writer. And she normally is a journalist. However, when COVID happened, she was obviously stuck in the UK. And because of that, she had the opportunity to write this book to profile local homeless people and also this hotel, which I thought was really cool. The premise of this book is we basically meet Mike Matthews, I believe. He is the owner of the Prince Rupert Hotel. And the Prince Rupert Hotel has been in this, like, it's not a city, but it's like a small town. I think it's called Shrewsbury in the UK. And basically, this hotel has been around for hundreds of years. If I remember correctly, it has even surfaced like Henry VIII and those kind of people. And he bought this hotel. And so it's old, there's like lots of problems with it. But it's a very like prestigious hotel. It's kind of like only the rich can really stay here, and you have this whole like luxury, but like jump back into like back in the day how people live in like Tudor style hotel. So Mike owns this hotel, and it's a hotel, so when things are doing good, it's tourists love coming and staying here. And you get like a special service. There's tea and dinner and that kind of stuff. And then of course COVID hit. So this book starts, I think, literally on March 17th, 2020, which I don't know about you, but that day I remember exactly where I was, because that day, as I'm Canadian, I was actually living abroad, and that day was when our Prime Minister said all Canadians come home. So that day is like solidified in my mind. Anyway, so Mike, the owner, basically it talks about like day by day, March 17th, March 18th, March 19th, March 2020, how like every day it's kind of revealing like the cases. Like at first only Italy and Spain were affected and UK was safe. But in the span of a week, it's like, holy cow, like they're getting thousands of cases, and there's a lockdown. So when that happened, I think they said usually a night at the hotel goes for like £250 a night. So when the lockdown happened, that's all that income he's losing. So then the council reached out to him to say, hey, they're having this movement called Everybody In, where the city or the council will subsidize you £89 a night for each homeless person you take in. And at first, Mike Matthews and his staff was obviously hesitant because there's lots of obviously stereotypes and preconceived notions of homeless people. You know, they'll create a mess, they don't respect the space. It's also a very old hotel with lots of history in it. But in the end, him and his staff took in 33 homeless people, and the story kind of profiles each person. There isn't really a narrative, and I can't really go through all the characters because there's literally like, well, 33 and then more as people move out and come in. But basically, Christina Lamb, who actually lives at the hotel for a bit, will also interview these people. And we see the profile of each employee, how they became part of the hotel, their reaction to housing all these homeless people. And then also they profile like each homeless person, like why are they homeless? Are they homeless because of COVID, like they lost their job? Are they homeless because they've been in this vicious cycle for like years and decades? Are they homeless because they choose to be homeless? Are they homeless because of addiction, like drugs or alcoholism? And it's just so interesting because it really shows that you can't say all homeless people are this and this, because each person is super unique. And I think during COVID-19, it really highlighted that like the average person is literally 2 paychecks away from homelessness. And that's actually pretty scary because I am guilty of, I think I'm fine, but you know, if a pandemic or something happens, like maybe I won't be. So this book is very, I guess, sobering, and you really see the concerns that Mike and his employees had with the homeless because they never dealt with them before, aside from seeing them in the street and kind of ignoring them, which I think we're all guilty of. But they have a lot of empathy throughout the book, and it's actually so impressive because there are times that some of the homeless residents will time and time again cause damage, cause leaking, have used needles, have friends over, there's drug deals and drug fights. But Mike and the staff have so much empathy and so much understanding, and it made me really reevaluate me as a person. Like, I feel I'm really jaded by homeless people, and I try to ignore them, you know, and just walk straight, no eye contact. And this book makes me really reevaluate that. So it's a really enjoyable read. There is no overarching narrative, so there's no plot. It's really just like snapshots and like slice of life kind of writing, and I really enjoyed it. Common themes that I believe Christina was trying to showcase in this book, I kind of touched on when I talked about the premise, is really the idea of compassion and empathy. Like, you know, these people really were all human, and these people just either, I don't even want to say made bad life choices, because I honestly feel from this book, you get the sense that it's not just making bad life choices. It's not as simple as that. A lot of these people had not great environments growing up, not support. Maybe they were exposed to addiction even as young as an infant, and just being stuck in this cycle. And like, how can they help themselves when they weren't given the tools to be successful in our society? And this book invoked a lot of empathy for me. Yeah, it's just interesting because like for me, like in my cities that I've lived in Canada, you hear a lot of like I guess criminals or homeless people who are caught for like stealing or vandalism and have like 30 counts against them. And you know, at some point, for me personally, I kind of lose empathy for these people. But this book, there are also people at this hotel. There are also reoccurring vandals or criminals, and like the owners of the hotel and the employees still have so much empathy for these people because they realize that these are how they were taught to survive. Like they are really just surviving, and you know, they weren't given the tools like, oh, like, or even given the experience to work for a job, and they just want like a quick solution to get what they want. And on top of that, a lot of these residents, not all of them, but a lot of them have addiction to alcoholism or drugs, in this case like to mamba, which isn't like heroin, but like they're so addicted that they're not thinking straight because they chemically want a quick fix. So this book is a common theme of like empathy and compassion, and just trying to understand that when you see someone on the street like begging or just homeless, you're just seeing them in that snapshot of their life, but you don't see all the years and decades of trauma that they went through to make them become that way. And like, you know, one, I guess, preconceived notion I have about homeless people is that they don't have family, they're probably single, or not single, but they probably don't have like dependents and that kind of stuff. But a lot of homeless people in this book, they either had like an abusive partner and have like maybe 5 kids or 8 kids, and you know, maybe it's the male who's homeless and he was kicked out, or he maybe just didn't have the tools to be a good dad, so he was kicked out and he can't talk to his kids. There was some woman in this book who came from abusive households as a kid, but then got raped or assaulted when they were young, got pregnant, but they don't have the tools to be a good mom, so had their kids taken away from them. There were some people in this book, and this was really shocking to me because I always thought, if I ever became in a situation where I financially couldn't be independent, I will always have family and or friends to take care of me. But a lot of people in this book, or not a lot, a handful of them, had family, like immediate family, living just a mile away. And it's like, why wouldn't they help their son or daughter, their adult son or daughter? Because I would think if that was a parent that I would. But, life isn't that simple. Like maybe their son and daughter have been, like fucking things up for like decades or years. And like at some point, like what do you do as a parent? I don't know. It's just so complicated and so complex. And this book does a really good job of me just questioning more of my empathy levels. And I really enjoyed that. Another common theme, I kind of already talked about, because I feel like everything's kind of like intertwined, is obviously the idea of addiction. Like addiction isn't just what you see on like the media or like how those like campaigns like, oh, like you're addicted, you live in the streets and blah, blah, blah. Addiction can come in many forms, and lots of like white collar workers or blue collar workers or like everyday people can also have addictions that maybe you don't see because they're like functioning addicts. And this book talks about that quite a bit, and addiction doesn't just come to drugs. I mean, alcohol is also a drug too, obviously, but alcohol is kind of like an accepted drug. So yeah, this book talks about the idea of addiction and how it's not as easy as just wanting to stop. Like I think when you're addicted, your body chemically changes and you kind of lose reasoning to make the right choices. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5, and one reason I didn't like it, and maybe it's like really like not petty of me, but there's lots of like, a good thing is there's lots of photos in the book. But even though like obviously there's context clues of what the photo is, I kind of wish there was like a specific caption of the photo. Because sometimes like, because everything's black and white, it's not very clear what I'm looking at. And sometimes in a book, in the pages before and after, it will name a bunch of characters, and then I don't know who the picture is. So I kind of wish it was more captioned for each photo. There were some photos with captions, but I wish it was for every photo. And I guess one thing I didn't like, but it's not really like a big thing, is that it's because I think Christina Lamb is a journalist first. It's kind of written as like a very long article. So in a way, I wish there was a narrative. But in the end, when I finished it, I think it's fine now knowing what the book is about and the intention. But I can see that being like a downside for people because it kind of jumps around. Like you meet a character and then you meet him and that's it. And you don't think about him until like 100 pages later. They come back. So that was kind of like chaotic, but it's fine. Two things I did really like about the book is how there is a full background of each resident that came to live at the Prince Rupert Hotel. I also love that they gave a full background of the employees that chose to stay and work there. And they even gave like a personal story of Mike and like his romance. And even though usually if you watch my reviews, I feel like they force romance too much. In this case, obviously not forced because it's his real life. But I like how they added that part to like humanize him overall. And he's not perfect, like he's a human too. But yeah, I like each profile of each homeless resident at the Prince Rupert Hotel and how it goes into detail of why they became the way they were. I also really enjoyed that they acknowledge that a lot of the stories that these people say, it's not fact check, right? So we don't know like if they're true or not, but it doesn't matter because when they tell these stories to the employees of the hotel, it's what they feel and what they think now. So it doesn't really matter what the backstory is if there's maybe like not some like truth to it, which I think is a very good reminder for me. Like I think our society is very about like all these facts and blah 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 and that kind of stuff now, but this person is here now and they need support, so don't go back and be like, hey, that doesn't like add up and that kind of stuff, because that won't really help the problem at hand. So that was very refreshing to see. The other reason I like the book, and maybe this could be triggering for people about, so a trigger warning I guess, is because they kind of go with each day from March 17th until like I think December 2021. Obviously they skip like some days and some weeks and stuff. I really like how this book is really a time capsule of COVID, because I feel like when I was living it, every day you wake up, there's news and it's not consistent what's happening. And like, I felt like COVID was really politicized. But this book, the way it talks about COVID is very like, not politicized, and it's just a reaction. And like, it's refreshing to learn about COVID in the UK because I only had the Canadian and American experience to an extent, American. But it's nice to hear other countries' experience with it and how there's also so much confusion with lockdowns, not lockdowns, with like special wording and special like, I don't want to say propaganda, but in a way it's kind of like like propaganda, like slogans, like circuit breaker and that kind of stuff. So like, it's just interesting to have this time capsule of COVID, and it's talked in a very like factual way. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's just crazy now living in 2022. Like, I know we're not fully out of the pandemic yet, but at least it seems we're not at like the heyday of it, and it's just interesting to read about it again in its heyday. On Goodreads, this book got an average of 3.68 out of 5, which I believe is very accurate. It came out pretty recently, so maybe it'll change over time. But a lot of people didn't like it because they thought that it glamorizes the owners and employees as making them so like these empathetic superheroes and blah blah blah. And then it kind of was an accurate representation of the homeless people in this area. I can't comment on that because I've never been to this area, but I don't think it like glamorize the owners and employees, and I don't think it did it at the cost of making the residents seem like they were a nuisance. Like, I felt they had this community they form, and I felt like it's really beautiful to see and heartwarming. So I disagree with those reviews. People also didn't like, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, they didn't like there was no narrative, and it kind of read as like a long journal article, which I can agree with. But I think if you know that going in, it's fine. And good reviews on Goodreads is a lot of stuff I've said already. People thought it was very heartwarming. It opened their eyes, opened their perspectives, and maybe have more empathy when you see a homeless person. Obviously, the first priority is their personal safety, and like obviously, depending where you live, you know your situation best. And this is like a homeless population in like a small town in the UK. So obviously, if you live in like a big city in America or like a big city in Canada, it could be different. Have your street smarts about you, but it definitely challenged a lot of my viewpoints, and to maybe seek to understand and just understand that I'm only seeing this person in this day, in this moment, and I don't know all the stuff they're going through that led them to this moment. So I really enjoyed that, and so did a lot of other people. Why I think you should read this book. I think this is a good moment to pause and think about your perspective of homelessness in your hometown or the homelessness in general. And if you have any negative associations with it, which I definitely did and definitely still do to an extent, for sure, is definitely read this book. I think it'll challenge your worldviews and it'll challenge your viewpoints. You don't have to agree with this book, and that's totally fine. But I really believe we just shouldn't live in an echo chamber, and I think it'll be really good for your worldviews to read this book. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if someone ever recommends a book to me, I always ask how it made them feel. Because if you ask me in a week, a year, 5 years from now, I won't remember all the details of this book. Even right now, I can't tell you all the characters I met in this book, but I also remember how it made me feel. So this book, The Prince Rupert Hotel for the Homeless by Christina Lamb, it made me reevaluate and feel awful about myself. Like you can probably get a sense from this video so far, living where I used to live in Western Canada, Vancouver, we had or have a very rampant homeless population, and there's daily violence that happens to civilians and within the community, and it's just really hard to see because we know it's not their fault. It is a result of the system failing them, and they're in this vicious cycle, and we're part of it too as civilians. But it's just so easy to other them and to blame them. And I've become jaded. So this book made me feel awful about myself for being so deep into this mindset. And it really challenged me to be more open-minded and just have more empathy. I don't know what action plan or action steps I can take, to be honest, at this moment. But yeah, it's got my brain thinking. So yeah, that's what this book has done for me. That is my review for The Prince Rupert Hotel for a Homeless by Christina Lamb. If you read this book, I would love to hear what you thought down below. Do you think it was accurate? Do you think it was just kind of all fluff? And if you want to join me next time, I'm super excited because this book is my highest, or I think like top 5 highest rated on Goodreads by others. So it's called Know My Name by Chanel Miller. It's a memoir. And yeah, I think this book will be very eye-opening for me again to read her perspective of what happened to her. So if you want to join me next time, this is the book. And as always, thank you for watching until the end of my video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.